The phone call came at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, jolting me awake from the first decent sleep I had gotten in weeks. My father's voice cut through the darkness like a blade, cold and commanding as always. He didn't bother with pleasantries or ask how I was doing. Instead, he delivered news that made my blood freeze in my veins. My sister Emma was going blind, and he expected me to fix it by giving up my corneas. No discussion, no consideration for my feelings, just a demand wrapped in the twisted logic of family obligation. He spoke as if my eyes were spare parts he could requisition. I drove through the winding roads from Portland to Salem the next morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as questions raced through my mind. How long had Emma been losing her sight? Why hadn't anyone told me sooner? The familiar landscape of Oregon's Willamette Valley blurred past my windows, but I barely noticed the rolling hills and scattered farmhouses that usually brought me comfort during these visits home. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I expected to find my family gathered for what I assumed would be an emotional but necessary conversation about Emma's condition and treatment options. Instead, I walked into what felt like a carefully orchestrated ambush. The living room was arranged like a makeshift conference room with my father Robert, sitting behind the oak dining table we normally used for holiday meals. My mother Linda perched nervously on the edge of the couch, her fingers twisting the tissue in her hands. Emma sat quietly in the corner armchair, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the window. But the most unsettling presence was Dr. Harrison, a man I remembered from my childhood as a family friend who occasionally joined us for barbecues and birthday celebrations. Now he sat across from my father with a manila folder thick with medical documents, his expression unnaturally serious for someone who used to joke about my scraped knees and playground injuries. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat and began explaining Emma's diagnosis in clinical terms that felt detached from the gravity of the situation. Stargardt disease, he called it, a genetic condition that caused progressive degeneration of the retina. The words washed over me as I tried to process not just the medical information, but the realization that my family had been keeping this devastating secret from me. My father leaned forward, his businessman demeanor taking control of the room. He explained that they had already scheduled me for compatibility testing at the hospital without bothering to ask my permission. The appointment was set for the following Thursday, and he had taken the liberty of clearing my schedule by calling my office and informing my supervisor that I would need extended time off for a family medical emergency. The presumption staggered me. Robert had been monitoring my medical records through his position in the insurance industry, cross-referencing my blood type and genetic markers with Emma's needs. He announced with the satisfaction of someone who had solved a complicated puzzle that I was a perfect match for corneal transplantation. His tone suggested this was a fortunate coincidence rather than an invasion of my privacy. Linda spoke up, then her voice trembling with carefully practiced emotion. She talked about how Emma had always been such a bright, artistic child, how her drawings and paintings had filled the house with color and joy. She described sleepless nights worrying about Emma's future, about whether she would ever be able to live independently or pursue her dreams. Through it all, Emma remained silent, her expression unreadable. Dr. Harrison opened his folder and began detailing the surgical procedures, explaining how corneal transplants worked and what the recovery process would entail. He spoke about success rates and potential complications with the detached professionalism of someone discussing the weather. When he mentioned that I would likely experience some vision impairment following the surgery, my father waved dismissively and said that was a small sacrifice for saving Emma's sight. The conversation continued for another hour, with various family members taking turns explaining why this surgery was not just necessary, but inevitable. Robert presented legal documents that would transfer my medical power of attorney to him, ensuring that all decisions about my care would be made in consultation with the family, rather than by me alone. He had consulted with lawyers and financial advisors, mapping out how the procedure would be covered by insurance, and what steps needed to be taken to ensure everything proceeded smoothly. As the meeting progressed, I began to understand that my family had been planning this intervention for months. They had researched doctors, investigated legal requirements, and even arranged for my post-surgical care without ever consulting me. Every detail had been meticulously planned except for one crucial element: my consent. When I finally found my voice and asked why no one had told me about Emma's condition earlier, the room fell silent. Linda looked at Robert, waiting for him to provide an explanation. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair but still said nothing. Dr. Harrison suddenly became very interested in organizing his paperwork. Robert's response revealed the calculating nature of his approach. He explained that they had wanted to have all the facts and options clearly laid out before involving me. He claimed they were protecting me from unnecessary worry while they explored every possible alternative. But as he spoke, I realized the truth: they had been afraid I might refuse, if given time to think about it or seek independent medical advice. The most shocking revelation came when Robert mentioned that he had already spoken with Marcus, Emma's boyfriend of 2 years. Marcus had been told that I had enthusiastically agreed to the surgery, and he had started planning a proposal to coincide with Emma's recovery. There were reservations at restaurants, appointments with jewelers, and discussions about their future together that were all built on the assumption that I would sacrifice my vision for Emma's happiness. The weight of their expectations pressed down on me like a physical force. This was not a request or even a plea for help. This was a demand dressed up as family loyalty, a manipulation disguised as love. As I looked around the room at these people who claimed to care about me, I realized they saw me not as a person with my own hopes and fears, but as a resource to be utilized in solving Emma's problem. After the formal meeting ended and the adults began discussing practical arrangements in the kitchen, I approached Emma in her chair by the window. She had been unusually quiet throughout the entire presentation, and I needed to understand her perspective on this life-changing decision that everyone else seemed to have already made. Emma's bedroom had barely changed since we were teenagers. The same purple walls, the same collection of art supplies scattered across the desk, the same photos of friends and family covering the mirror. But as I sat on the edge of her bed, I noticed subtle differences that I had missed during my recent visits. The lighting was much brighter than it used to be, with additional lamps positioned strategically around the room. Her books were organized differently, with audio versions mixed among the traditional texts. When I asked Emma to tell me honestly how she was feeling about the surgery, her composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her face as she admitted that she had been legally blind for 18 months. The progression of her vision loss had been much faster than anyone had expected, and she had been struggling to hide the extent of her disability from most people in her life. She revealed that Robert had forbidden her from using mobility aids or seeking support services because he was ashamed of having a disabled daughter. He worried about how her condition would reflect on the family reputation and his standing in the business community. Emma had been forced to develop elaborate strategies for navigating daily life without revealing the true extent of her vision loss. The most heartbreaking revelation was that Emma had been secretly working with a guide dog named Chester. She had been training with him for 6 months, but she had to keep him at her friend Sarah's apartment because Robert refused to allow a service animal in the house. Emma described the freedom and independence that Chester had given her, how she had started venturing out on her own again and rebuilding her confidence. Emma pulled out a tablet and showed me photos of sculptures she had been creating in Sarah's garage workshop. The pieces were stunning, abstract forms that seemed to flow like water-textured surfaces that invited touch compositions that conveyed emotion through shape and movement, rather than visual detail. She explained that losing her sight had actually enhanced her other senses and opened up new creative possibilities she had never explored before. Through her tears, Emma confessed that she had been accepted to a prestigious art program for visually impaired artists at the California College of the Arts in San Francisco. The program was specifically designed to help blind and low-vision students develop their artistic abilities using adaptive techniques and assistive technologies. She had submitted her application in secret, afraid to tell the family about her dreams because she knew Robert would disapprove. But the acceptance letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, and Emma had been hiding it in her bedroom, unsure whether she would ever be able to pursue this opportunity. Robert had made it clear that he expected her to focus entirely on medical treatments and potential cures rather than accepting her disability and learning to live with it. Emma then shared something that made my stomach turn. She had overheard Robert talking to Linda late one night discussing backup plans in case I refused to donate my corneas. He had suggested that they could pressure me by implying that Emma might hurt herself if forced to live with blindness. He had even researched statistics about suicide rates among people with vision loss planning to use those numbers as emotional leverage against me. As Emma spoke, I began to understand that she was as much a victim of Robert's manipulation as I was. She had been isolated from support networks, prevented from developing independence, and guilt-tripped into believing that her worth as a person depended on regaining her sight. The surgery was not really about helping Emma. It was about preserving Robert's image of the perfect family he wanted to project to the world. Emma reached under her mattress and pulled out a small recording device. Her hands shook as she explained that she had started documenting conversations with Robert after he became increasingly controlling and verbally abusive about her condition. She had been gathering evidence of his behavior, but she was too scared to confront him directly. She played back a conversation from the previous week where Robert could be heard coaching her on what to say during our family meeting. He had scripted emotional responses and rehearsed touching stories about their childhood together. He had even suggested specific phrases that Emma should use to make me feel guilty about any reluctance to help her. But the most chilling part of the recording was Robert's casual discussion of backup plans. He had been researching ways to have me declared mentally incompetent if I refused the surgery. He had consulted with lawyers about involuntary medical procedures and explored legal precedents for family members making medical decisions on behalf of reluctant relatives. Emma's final revelation left me speechless. She suspected that Robert had been installing hidden cameras throughout the house to monitor our conversations and gather information he could use to manipulate the situation. She had noticed small changes in the positioning of decorative items and electronic devices, subtle modifications that suggested surveillance equipment had been concealed in common areas. As I processed this information, I realized that our entire family dynamic had been built on lies, manipulation, and control. Robert had created an environment where honest communication was impossible, and where family members were afraid to express their true feelings or pursue their own goals. Emma's blindness had simply provided him with a new tool for exerting power over both of us. I held Emma as she cried, promising her that I would find a way to help her escape this toxic situation and pursue her artistic dreams in California. But first, I needed to understand the full extent of Robert's deception and manipulation. If there really were hidden cameras in the house, then I had an opportunity to turn his own surveillance system against him. I waited until after midnight when the house had settled into silence. Before beginning my search for the recording devices Emma suspected were hidden throughout our family home. Using the flashlight app on my phone, I carefully examined picture frames, decorative objects, and electronic equipment in the common areas where our family meetings had taken place. It didn't take long to find the first camera, a tiny lens barely visible behind the mesh speaker cover of what appeared to be a normal Bluetooth device on the bookshelf. As I continued searching, I discovered 5 more recording devices concealed in locations that would capture conversations in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. Robert had been systematically documenting every interaction between family members for months. I carefully removed the memory cards from each device, replacing them with blank ones, so Robert wouldn't realize his surveillance system had been compromised. Back in my old bedroom, I used my laptop to review hours of recorded footage that revealed the true scope of my father's manipulation and deception. The earliest recordings showed Robert meeting privately with Dr. Harrison in our kitchen, discussing how to present the corneal transplant as an urgent medical necessity rather than an elective procedure. Dr. Harrison expressed concerns about the ethics of pressuring me into surgery, but Robert reassured him with promises of substantial under-the-table payments that would supplement his legitimate medical fees. I watched footage of Robert coaching Linda on how to present herself as the suffering mother who couldn't bear to watch her daughter lose her independence. He scripted her emotional responses and rehearsed her talking points, ensuring that her performance during our family meeting would maximize the guilt and pressure I would feel to comply with their demands. Even more disturbing were recordings of Robert's interactions with Emma. I saw him giving her what appeared to be anxiety medication, telling her it would help her cope with the stress of her vision loss. But based on her increasingly compliant and passive behavior in the recordings, I suspected he was actually drugging her to make her more manageable and less likely to resist his plans. The recordings revealed that Robert had been forging my signature on medical documents for months. He had authorized consultations, diagnostic tests, and preliminary surgical preparations using fraudulent consent forms. He had even established a medical file in my name at Dr. Harrison's practice, complete with fabricated psychological evaluations that portrayed me as someone who would benefit from the sense of purpose that comes from helping family members. I discovered that Robert had been systematically stealing money from my inheritance from our grandmother. She had left both Emma and me substantial trust funds, but Robert, as the executor of her estate, had been redirecting my portion to cover Emma's medical expenses and his own mounting debts. Bank statements hidden in his home office showed that he had been gambling heavily at local casinos, losing thousands of dollars every month. The recordings also captured Robert's phone conversations with various extended family members, where he portrayed me as a selfish and uncaring brother who was refusing to help his disabled sister. He had been methodically poisoning my relationships with aunts, uncles, and cousins, ensuring that I would have no family support if I chose to resist the corneal transplant. Perhaps most shocking of all, I found recordings of Robert discussing his backup plan to have me declared mentally incompetent if I refused to cooperate. He had already consulted with a psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations, and he had been documenting my behavior to build a case that I was unable to make rational medical decisions due to psychological instability. As I continued reviewing the footage, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. Emma entered carrying Chester, a beautiful golden retriever wearing a professional service dog harness. Behind her was Sarah, a young woman I vaguely remembered from Emma's high school graduation party several years earlier. Sarah introduced herself as more than just Emma's friend. She was a paralegal working at a law firm that specialized in elder abuse and financial exploitation cases. Emma had reached out to her months ago when Robert's behavior became increasingly controlling and abusive. Together, they had been quietly building a legal case against him, documenting his financial crimes, and gathering evidence of his manipulation. Sarah pulled out a thick folder containing bank records, forged documents, and written statements from witnesses who had observed Robert's concerning behavior. She explained that they had been waiting for the right moment to take action. But my arrival and Robert's escalation of his plans had accelerated their timeline. Emma revealed that she had never wanted the corneal transplant surgery. She had accepted her blindness and was learning to thrive with adaptive techniques and assistive technology. Chester had given her mobility and independence that she had never experienced before, even when she had full vision. The art program in San Francisco represented a chance for her to build a career based on her actual abilities rather than her family's expectations. Sarah explained that Robert's actions constituted multiple felonies, including fraud, forgery, identity theft, and financial abuse. The evidence they had gathered was more than sufficient to support criminal charges, but they had been reluctant to move forward without a way to protect Emma from Robert's retaliation. As we talked through the early hours of the morning, a plan began to take shape. We would use Robert's own recordings against him, confronting the family with undeniable evidence of his crimes and manipulation. Sarah would be present as legal counsel, and we would have law enforcement on standby to intervene if Robert became violent or tried to destroy evidence. But first, we needed to ensure Emma's safety and independence. Chester would remain with her at all times, and Sarah had already prepared temporary housing arrangements where Emma could stay if she needed to leave the family home immediately. The art school in San Francisco had been contacted and was holding Emma's spot in the program while she resolved her family situation. I realized that what I had initially seen as a crisis about my corneas was actually an opportunity to expose years of abuse and manipulation that had damaged our entire family. By refusing to be intimidated and fighting back with truth and evidence, I could not only protect myself, but also help Emma escape Robert's control and pursue the independent life she deserved. The confrontation began at breakfast the next morning when I walked into the kitchen carrying a laptop loaded with the surveillance footage and a folder containing all the evidence Sarah had compiled. Robert was reading the newspaper while Linda prepared his usual elaborate morning meal, and Emma sat quietly at the table, with Chester lying calmly at her feet. Dr. Harrison had arrived early for what he believed would be a follow-up discussion about surgical scheduling, but his expression changed dramatically when he saw the legal documents Sarah placed on the table. As Emma's official advocate, Sarah introduced herself and explained that she was representing both Emma and me in matters related to Robert's fraudulent activities. I began by playing selected recordings that captured Robert's most damning statements. His voice filled the kitchen as he discussed bribing Dr. Harrison, forging my medical consent, and planning to have me declared incompetent. Linda's face went white as she heard her husband casually discussing strategies for manipulating their own children. Dr. Harrison immediately began defending himself, claiming that Robert had threatened to report him for past malpractice incidents if he didn't cooperate with the corneal transplant plan. He produced his own recordings of conversations where Robert had made increasingly aggressive demands and financial promises. It became clear that Dr. Harrison was as much a victim of Robert's manipulation as the rest of us, though his willingness to compromise medical ethics for money had made him a weak target. When I presented the evidence of Robert's financial crimes, including the theft of my inheritance and the forged medical documents, Linda finally understood the extent of her husband's deception. She had been told that I was being selfish and unreasonable, but the recordings proved that Robert had been lying to her about my reactions and manipulating her emotions to gain her support. Emma stood up from the table, Chester immediately moving to her side, and spoke directly to Robert for the first time in months. Her voice was steady and clear as she announced that she was declining the corneal transplant surgery and instead planned to pursue her education in San Francisco. She explained that she had learned to navigate the world effectively with her guide dog and adaptive techniques, and she no longer needed or wanted surgical intervention that might compromise her newfound independence. Robert's reaction was immediate and violent. He swept the breakfast dishes off the table and began shouting about ungrateful children and wasted sacrifices. He demanded that Emma hand over Chester, claiming that service dogs were unnecessary crutches that prevented people from reaching their full potential. When Emma refused, Robert moved toward her aggressively, but Chester stepped between them with a low, warning growl. As Robert's anger escalated, he began threatening to destroy Emma's sculptures and contact the art school to withdraw her application. He grabbed his phone and started calling people, trying to undo arrangements and sabotage Emma's future plans out of spite. That was when I realized we could no longer handle this situation as a family matter. I called 911 while Robert was distracted with his phone calls, explaining to the dispatcher that we had evidence of financial fraud and were concerned about the safety of a disabled family member. Sarah provided additional legal context, and within 20 minutes, 2 police officers and a detective specializing in financial crimes had arrived at our house. Robert immediately tried to charm the officers, presenting himself as a concerned father dealing with mentally unstable children who were making false accusations. But when Detective Martinez asked to see the surveillance footage and financial documents, Robert's demeanor changed completely. He demanded to speak with his lawyer and refused to answer any questions about the evidence we had compiled. Dr. Harrison, faced with the prospect of criminal charges for medical fraud, decided to cooperate fully with the investigation. He provided detailed information about Robert's bribes and threats, and he offered to testify about the unethical pressure he had been under to perform unnecessary surgery. His cooperation helped establish the pattern of manipulation and coercion that had defined Robert's approach to solving Emma's vision loss. Linda sat quietly throughout the entire confrontation, occasionally asking clarifying questions about evidence she found particularly shocking. When Detective Martinez asked if she had been aware of her husband's financial crimes, she honestly admitted that she had trusted Robert to manage family finances and had never questioned his explanations about money matters. The most dramatic moment came when Robert tried to delete files from his computer while the detective was interviewing Emma. Officer Johnson caught him in the act and immediately confiscated his laptop and phone as potential evidence. Robert's attempt to destroy evidence while under investigation added obstruction of justice charges to the growing list of crimes he was facing. As the police investigation continued, Emma revealed the final piece of information that reframed everything I thought I knew about my family. She pulled out a letter she had been saving for months, waiting for the right moment to share its contents with me. The letter was from Linda, written 28 years ago, but never sent addressed to a Dr. Michael Torres. Linda's face crumpled as Emma read portions of the letter aloud. It was a confession about an affair Linda had during her marriage to Robert, and an admission that I was not Robert's biological son. The letter explained that Linda had ended the relationship and never told Dr. Torres about the pregnancy because she was afraid of destroying two families. Suddenly, Robert's lifelong pattern of treating me differently from Emma made perfect sense. He had been punishing me for Linda's infidelity, using me as a constant reminder of her betrayal, while simultaneously benefiting from the appearance of being a devoted stepfather. His willingness to sacrifice my vision for Emma's benefit was the ultimate expression of decades of resentment and manipulation. Detective Martinez took extensive notes as the family secrets unraveled, recognizing that the psychological abuse and financial manipulation formed a complex pattern that would require careful legal analysis. He assured us that Robert would be held accountable for his crimes, but he also emphasized that rebuilding our family relationships would require time therapy and honest communication about years of hidden trauma. 3 months after Robert's arrest, I found myself sitting in a downtown Portland courtroom, preparing to testify against the man I had called father for 28 years. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, family therapy sessions, and profound personal discoveries that had completely reshaped my understanding of my identity and relationships. Robert faced an impressive array of charges: financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, attempted coercion, and obstruction of justice. His defense attorney tried to portray him as a devoted father who had made desperate choices to help his disabled daughter. But the evidence Sarah and I had compiled painted a very different picture of calculated manipulation and criminal behavior. During my testimony, I described the psychological pressure Robert had exerted through years of making me feel like an outsider in my own family. I explained how his surveillance system and financial manipulations had created an environment where honest communication was impossible and family members lived in fear of his reactions. The prosecutor used Robert's own recordings to demonstrate the premeditated nature of his crimes. Emma testified with Chester lying calmly beside the witness stand, her voice strong and clear, as she described years of being controlled and isolated because of her disability. She explained how Robert's shame about her blindness had prevented her from accessing the support services and adaptive technologies that could have helped her maintain her independence much earlier. Dr. Harrison had already pleaded guilty to medical fraud charges in exchange for his cooperation with the prosecution. His testimony revealed the extent to which Robert had corrupted professional relationships and ethical standards in pursuit of his goals. The medical board had revoked Dr. Harrison's license, but his willingness to expose Robert's broader criminal network had helped him avoid prison time. Linda's role in the proceedings was more complicated. While she had not been directly involved in Robert's financial crimes, her passive enabling of his controlling behavior had contributed to the toxic family environment. She voluntarily entered a victim impact program that helped her understand how emotional manipulation had compromised her ability to protect her children from abuse. The most life-changing development during this period was my growing relationship with Dr. Michael Torres, my biological father. Linda had contacted him after the truth came out, and he had responded with warmth and curiosity about the son he never knew he had. Dr. Torres was a veterinarian who specialized in working with service animals, which created an immediate connection through Chester and Emma's needs. Our first meeting took place at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, where Dr. Torres shared photos of my half-sisters and stories about the family I had never known existed. He expressed regret about missing my childhood, but enthusiasm about building a relationship in the present. His calm, supportive demeanor was a stark contrast to Robert's manipulative intensity, and I began to understand what healthy family relationships could look like. Emma had moved in with Sarah and was thriving in an environment where her independence was celebrated rather than discouraged. Chester had become not just her mobility aid, but also her emotional support during the difficult legal proceedings. Sarah's apartment had been transformed into an art studio where Emma worked on sculptures for her portfolio, preparing for her delayed entry into the California College of the Arts program. I'd begun dating Jessica, the attorney, who had represented me during the criminal case against Robert. Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than family pressure or social expectations. Jessica's insights into legal advocacy had also helped me understand how to channel my anger about Robert's behavior into productive action that could help other families avoid similar manipulation. The most satisfying aspect of this period was watching Emma's artistic career begin to flourish. Her sculptures were gaining recognition in the disability arts community, and she had received commissions from organizations that wanted to showcase the creativity that could emerge from different sensory experiences. Her work challenged conventional ideas about art and perception in ways that inspired both disabled and non-disabled audiences. Robert's attempt to manipulate the court system provided the most dramatic moment of the trial. His defense attorney argued that Robert had been protecting Emma from my supposedly unstable and violent tendencies, claiming that the corneal transplant was necessary because I posed a danger to my sister. But when Emma testified about Robert's actual behavior, describing the verbal abuse and isolation she had endured, his credibility was completely destroyed. The revelation that Robert had deliberately caused the accident that worsened Emma's vision was the final blow to his defense. Emma disclosed that Robert had been driving recklessly during an argument about her college plans 3 years earlier, causing a crash that damaged her already compromised eyesight. He had then blamed the accident on Emma's vision problems rather than his own dangerous behavior behind the wheel. Detective Martinez had uncovered additional evidence of Robert's financial crimes, including fraudulent insurance claims and embezzlement from his employer's client accounts. The scope of his criminal behavior extended far beyond our family situation, affecting dozens of people who had trusted him with their financial security and medical decisions. Dr. Torres attended many of the court sessions, providing emotional support during my testimony and helping me process the complex feelings that arose from learning about Robert's decades of deception. His presence in my life created a stabilizing influence that helped me navigate the legal proceedings without becoming consumed by anger or bitterness. As the trial progressed, I realized that Robert's conviction would provide legal justice, but the real healing would come from rebuilding authentic relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Emma and I were learning to communicate directly about our needs and feelings instead of trying to navigate Robert's manipulative family dynamics. Linda's participation in therapy had helped her understand how her passive role in family conflicts had enabled Robert's abusive behavior. She was working to develop more assertive communication skills and to rebuild trust with Emma and me through consistent actions rather than dramatic emotional appeals. The sentencing phase of Robert's trial became an opportunity for our family to speak publicly about the impact of his crimes. Emma used her victim impact statement to advocate for other families dealing with disability-related manipulation, while I focused on the importance of financial transparency and ethical medical decision-making. 6 months after Robert was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, I stood in the bright, airy gallery space of the California College of the Arts in San Francisco, watching Emma guide a group of visiting donors through her latest sculpture exhibition. The transformation in her confidence and independence was remarkable to witness, and Chester moved beside her with the practiced ease of a partner who had helped her navigate not just physical spaces, but also emotional healing. Emma's work had evolved dramatically since she began her formal studies in adaptive arts. Her latest series, titled Texture and Truth, consisted of large-scale installations that invited viewers to experience art through touch, sound, and movement rather than sight alone. The pieces challenged traditional assumptions about how people interact with artistic expression, and they had attracted attention from museums across the country. The success of Emma's artistic career had vindicated her decision to embrace her blindness rather than pursue risky surgical interventions. Her sculptures were being featured in exhibitions that celebrated disabled artists, and she had received a commission to create a permanent installation for the lobby of the National Federation of the Blind headquarters in Baltimore. The recognition proved that her value as an artist came from her unique perspective and technical skills, not from conforming to conventional standards of ability. My relationship with Jessica had deepened into an engagement announcement that brought genuine joy to our reconstructed family. Jessica had proposed to me during a quiet weekend at the Oregon coast, presenting me with a ring that Emma had designed as a surprise collaboration. The proposal was everything Robert's manipulation had never been: respectful, collaborative, and focused on building a future together rather than meeting external expectations. Dr. Torres had embraced his role as my father with enthusiasm that made up for the lost years of my childhood. He walked me down the aisle at our wedding ceremony, which took place in a small park in Portland, where Emma's sculptures provided the decorative backdrop. The wedding was intimate and authentic, attended only by people who genuinely supported our relationship rather than those who felt obligated to participate in family theater. Linda's journey toward healing had been slower and more complicated, but her commitment to changing her behavior was evident in her new career as a victim advocate. She had completed training to counsel families, experiencing financial abuse and domestic manipulation, using her own experiences to help others recognize warning signs and develop safety plans. Her work provided a constructive outlet for the guilt she felt about enabling Robert's behavior for so many years. The nonprofit foundation I had established using my recovered inheritance was gaining momentum in its mission to help families navigate medical exploitation and financial abuse. Working with legal professionals and medical ethicists, we had developed educational materials and support services for families facing pressure to make sacrificial medical decisions. The foundation's work honored the painful lessons our family had learned, while preventing others from experiencing similar manipulation. Emma and Sarah had expanded their gallery concept beyond San Francisco, partnering with disability advocacy organizations to create exhibition spaces in major cities across the United States. Their business model challenged art world assumptions about accessibility and audience engagement, proving that inclusive design principles could enhance artistic experiences for everyone rather than limiting them to specific populations. Chester had become something of a celebrity in the service dog community, serving as an ambassador for the independence and dignity that well-trained assistance animals could provide to their partners. Emma often spoke at conferences about the importance of allowing disabled people to make their own choices about adaptive technologies and support services, using Chester as a living example of how the right accommodations could enhance rather than restrict personal freedom. Dr. Torres had helped me understand the genetic aspects of Stargardt disease, confirming that my decision to refuse corneal donation had been medically sound as well as personally appropriate. The disease that affected Emma was not something that corneal transplants could cure, and Robert's insistence on surgical intervention had been based on wishful thinking rather than scientific evidence. My eyes would not have helped Emma, but sacrificing them would have disabled both of us unnecessarily. The most challenging aspect of this period was dealing with Robert's continued attempts at manipulation from prison. His letters arrived regularly, filled with apologies that felt calculated rather than sincere, and requests for reconciliation that ignored the ongoing impact of his crimes. Jessica helped me understand that Robert's behavior in prison was simply an extension of his lifelong pattern of using emotional manipulation to achieve his goals. When Robert's parole hearing approached, after he had served 2 years of his sentence, Emma and I both submitted statements opposing his early release. We provided evidence that he continued to blame us for his legal troubles, rather than accepting responsibility for his criminal behavior. The parole board ultimately denied his request, recognizing that his lack of genuine remorse made him a continued risk to family members and potential future victims. The success of Emma's art career had attracted media attention that brought additional scrutiny to Robert's crimes and our family's story. Documentary filmmakers wanted to explore themes of disability, family manipulation, and medical ethics through our experiences. While we were selective about media participation, Emma used some of these opportunities to advocate for policy changes that would protect disabled people from family members who sought to make medical decisions based on shame rather than the person's actual needs and preferences. My relationship with my half-sisters, whom Dr. Torres had introduced me to gradually over the course of the year, had developed into genuine friendships that enriched my understanding of healthy family dynamics. Maria, who was 25 and worked as a social worker, and Carmen, who was 22 and studying environmental science, welcomed me warmly and without the complicated emotional baggage that had characterized my relationships within Robert's household. The healing process had not been linear or simple, but it had been authentic in ways that our previous family interactions never were. Emma and I had learned to communicate directly about our needs and feelings instead of trying to navigate around Robert's unpredictable reactions. Linda had developed the ability to support us without trying to manage our emotions or control our decisions. As Emma's exhibition opening continued around us, I reflected on how much our lives had changed since that shocking phone call about corneal donation. What had initially seemed like a medical crisis had actually been an opportunity to expose and escape years of manipulation and abuse. By refusing to sacrifice my vision, I had ultimately helped Emma find her true sight. 1 year later, I stood in the main gallery of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Portland, watching Emma deliver the opening remarks for her first major solo exhibition. The show, titled Seeing Beyond Sight, Art and Independence, featured 24 sculptures that chronicled her journey from isolation and dependence to creativity and self-determination. Chester lay quietly beside the podium, his calm presence a testament to the partnership that had made Emma's transformation possible. The opening night crowd included art collectors, disability advocates, museum donors, and family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate Emma's achievement. Dr. Torres stood proudly in the front row, wearing a boutonniere that Emma had crafted from recycled materials as part of her sustainable art practice. Linda sat nearby, her expression reflecting both joy at Emma's success and continuing sadness about the years of potential that Robert's control had stolen from both of her children. Jessica held my hand as Emma began speaking about the creative process behind her sculptures. She described how losing her sight had actually enhanced her ability to perceive texture, weight, and spatial relationships in ways that informed her artistic vision. Her voice was confident and articulate as she explained how each piece in the exhibition represented a different aspect of learning to navigate the world through touch, sound, and intuition rather than visual cues. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a massive installation called Truth and Consequences, which incorporated materials Emma had gathered from significant locations in her journey toward independence. Fragments of concrete from the sidewalks, where she had first learned to travel with Chester, were embedded alongside metals from the tools she used in her sculpture practice. The piece invited viewers to explore its surfaces through touch, experiencing art the way Emma experienced the world. During her speech, Emma acknowledged the painful circumstances that had led to her artistic breakthrough. She spoke honestly about family manipulation and the importance of allowing disabled people to make their own choices about medical treatment, adaptive technologies, and life goals. Her message resonated with audience members who had their own experiences of being pressured to conform to other people's expectations rather than pursuing their authentic aspirations. The success of Emma's career had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. Museums in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles had acquired pieces from her earlier series, and she had received invitations to create installations for public spaces across the United States. Art critics had praised her work for challenging conventional assumptions about sensory experience and artistic expression, positioning her as an important voice in contemporary disability culture. My own life had found stability and purpose through the nonprofit foundation that had grown from our family's traumatic experiences. The organization now employed 12 staff members who provided legal advocacy, financial counseling, and emotional support to families facing medical manipulation and elder care exploitation. Our educational materials were being used by hospitals, social service agencies, and law enforcement departments to help professionals recognize and respond to signs of family-based abuse. Jessica and I had recently learned that we were expecting our first child, a development that filled us with excitement and gratitude. The pregnancy had prompted serious conversations about the kind of family environment we wanted to create, discussions that were informed by our hard-won understanding of how manipulation and control could poison relationships between parents and children. We were committed to raising our child with honesty, respect, and genuine support for their individual interests and abilities. Dr. Torres had become the father figure I had always needed but never experienced with Robert. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation or guilt. He had helped me understand that healthy family relationships required consistent effort and communication, but they should never involve sacrifice that compromised one person's well-being for another's convenience. Linda's transformation had been perhaps the most surprising development of the past year. Her work as a victim advocate had given her confidence and purpose that had been missing during her marriage to Robert. She had developed assertiveness skills that allowed her to support Emma and me without trying to manage our emotions or fix our problems for us. The therapy she had completed had helped her recognize how her passive enabling had contributed to family dysfunction, and she was committed to building relationships based on respect rather than emotional manipulation. Chester had inspired us to establish a service dog training program as part of Emma's Gallery business model. Young people with disabilities worked with professional trainers to prepare assistance animals for partnerships with individuals who needed mobility support, medical alert services, or emotional stability assistance. The program provided employment opportunities for disabled workers while meeting the growing demand for well-trained service animals. The most satisfying moment of the evening came when Emma announced the establishment of a scholarship fund for disabled artists who wanted to pursue adaptive arts education. The fund would be supported by proceeds from her sculpture sales, and it would specifically assist students whose families had initially discouraged their artistic ambitions due to disability-related prejudice. Emma's success was creating opportunities for other young people to develop their creative potential without having to choose between family acceptance and personal fulfillment. As the exhibition opening continued around us, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from our family's crisis. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not what they demand from you, but the truth they need to hear and the support they require to build their own independence. Real love does not require one person to sacrifice their well-being for another's comfort, and standing up to manipulation, even from family members, can ultimately save everyone involved from cycles of abuse and control. Robert's manipulation had been based on the false premise that Emma's worth as a person depended on regaining her sight, and that my value as a brother could only be demonstrated through self-sacrifice. But our healing journey had proven that Emma was remarkable precisely because she had learned to thrive with her disability, and that my support was most valuable when it respected her autonomy rather than trying to fix her condition. The final speaker of the evening was Dr. Michael Torres, who shared his perspective on the importance of choosing family members based on love and respect, rather than biological obligation alone. He spoke about the joy of developing a relationship with his adult son and the privilege of watching Emma's artistic career flourish through determination and authentic self-expression. As the formal program concluded and guests began circulating through the gallery to examine Emma's sculptures more closely, I felt a profound sense of peace about the choices we had all made over the past year. Emma was touching lives through her art while building a sustainable career that celebrated rather than apologized for her disability. Linda was helping other families escape manipulation through her victim advocacy work. Dr. Torres had gained a son, while I had gained a father who understood that love meant supporting rather than controlling the people you care about. The evening ended with Emma guiding a group of young disabled artists through her exhibition, explaining techniques and answering questions about adaptive studio practices. Chester walked beside her with practiced ease, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had found her authentic path despite significant obstacles. Watching her share her knowledge and experience with the next generation of disabled artists, I realized that our refusal to accept Robert's manipulative demands had created ripple effects that would benefit countless other families. Robert remained in prison, his parole requests consistently denied due to his continued refusal to accept responsibility for his crimes. His letters had stopped coming after we made it clear that we would not respond to his attempts at reconciliation until he demonstrated genuine change rather than strategic remorse. The distance from his influence had allowed all of us to discover who we were when we were not constantly reacting to his manipulation and control. As Jessica and I prepared to leave the gallery, Emma approached us with a small wrapped package. Inside was a sculpture she had created specifically for our future child, a smooth, abstract form that would be safe for small hands to explore, while introducing them to the concept that beauty comes in many different forms and can be appreciated through multiple senses. The gift represented Emma's vision of childhood development that celebrated curiosity and difference, rather than demanding conformity to narrow standards of normalcy. The drive back to Portland from San Francisco gave Jessica and me time to reflect on how much our lives had changed since that shocking phone call about corneal donation. What had initially seemed like a medical crisis had actually been an invitation to examine the foundations of our family relationships and rebuild them based on truth, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I had learned that refusing to enable someone's manipulation was actually the most loving response possible because it created space for authentic relationships to develop. Emma had discovered that accepting her disability opened creative possibilities she never could have imagined when she was focused on regaining her sight. Linda had found purpose and confidence through helping other families escape the kind of manipulation she had once enabled. Most importantly, We had all learned that family loyalty should never require anyone to sacrifice their physical health, emotional well-being, or personal autonomy for someone else's comfort or convenience. True love supports people in becoming their most authentic selves, rather than demanding they conform to external expectations about how their lives should unfold. As we pulled into our driveway in Portland, I felt grateful for the courage Emma had shown in speaking her truth, and the wisdom Jessica had provided throughout our legal and emotional healing process. The future we were building together was based on the kind of honest communication and mutual respect that had been impossible in Robert's environment of surveillance and manipulation. Looking back, I realized that the most important truth I had given my father was not the answer to his demand about my corneas, but the message that love does not require self-sacrifice, and that healthy families support each member's individual growth and independence. By refusing to give up my sight, I had ultimately helped Emma find her vision, and in standing up to manipulation, we had all discovered what authentic family relationships could look like when built on respect rather than control. What would you do if a family member demanded that you sacrifice your health for their benefit? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting your own well-being? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, standing up for yourself, and finding the courage to speak truth even when it is difficult. Share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not measured by how much they are willing to sacrifice for others. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth they need to hear rather than what they are demanding from you.